Okay, so welcome to this webinar, the first of our Green Academy webinars of the year. More about that later. And it's called 12 and a half Kick-Ass Sustainability Ideas. And we do this every year. Some of them stay the same every year because they're absolutely vital. But there are quite a few that are new to this year. I do keep these fresh and try and bring in some of the latest thinking that I have gleaned from working with some really great clients and others over the year. So who am I? I have been involved in sustainability now for coming up on 23, 24 years, one way or another. I have written 5 books on sustainability. The one I'm probably most proud of is The Green Executive, which came out in 2010. So that's going back away now. And the structure of the Green Academy sessions was originally based around the structure of that book, although it does get upgraded every year. Some sessions get upgraded more than others, but there is a constant renewal going on there. And I've written some other books. Actually, we're for the first time in a few years in this session, we're not going to touch on the 80-20 rule, but that accelerating sustainability using the 80-20 rule is an interesting concept that somebody pitched to me, and I wrote a book about it. So my company is Tyranny Limited. We have 3 main strands of activity: sustainability strategy, employee engagement, and professional development. And yes, this is a bit of an advert because it's a free webinar. You can see some of the businesses we've worked with over the years there. Some really big names. As I say, this is the taster session for our Green Academy, and there are 10 other sessions which are much more thematic and cover a lot of this, the details that really I think that you need to implement sustainability properly within your organization. So on to the ideas, but first I want to talk about the workbook. Now, the workbooks are probably the most important part of Green Academy. This one's quite a simple one. We're going to go through the ideas, try not to look too far down because you don't want any spoilers. And every time I talk about one of these ideas, I would like you to jot down some notes in how you might apply this thinking in your organization or your situation. So if you're a consultant or a change manager elsewhere, it may be in somebody else's organization or a community group or whatever it might be. And I want you to rank that opportunity high, medium, or low. And that's completely up to you subjectively how you do that. And when I say risk, I'm talking about the downsides, of cost or risk of it going wrong, backfiring, something like that, high, medium, or low as well. And you'll see how we rank it, how we'll use those rankings towards the end. If you haven't printed off the workbook, I've just noticed there's a typo that's hung over from 2020. It's going to say 2022. It does everywhere else. Then don't worry. A piece of paper and a pencil will do the job, or notes on your iPad and an Apple Pencil, whatever it might be. You can just sketch down these ideas, but do the high, medium, low for opportunity and risk. Most of the other sessions have more complex workbooks than this when we're going through exercises in detail. This is a very simple one for this session because we've got a lot to pack in, but please do this. This is the most important part of it, because this is how you will take listening to me drone on for an hour into actually changing something within your organization. This is the crucial part, because I listen to webinars, I think, oh yeah, this is quite interesting, must do that someday, and then I go back to my email and never get to do that thing. Right, so on to the ideas. First of all, a very simple one that will cost you nothing is please adopt a can-do attitude. And yes, everybody thinks about doing that, but there's nothing worse than being pessimistic about sustainability. And the opposite of can do is this doomism that we get all the time. And ever since Silent Spring, Rachel Carson's famous book, was written in 1962, we've been basically preaching we've got to change or the world's going to go to pot, everything's going to go horribly wrong. And the question I always ask people now is that 60 years ago, have things changed enough? It's taken 60 years to get to COP26 when people have agreed that change needs to happen and agreed almost the scale of the change, but not quite what they're going to do. And there's some question marks over commitment. So doomism's track record is patchy at best. But when you're within an organization, I think it's very important, because if somebody hasn't already got the green message, despite all these messages that are flying at them all the time, all this publicity, all these newspaper articles, then telling them that the world's going to fry once again is not going to help. If somebody does get the message, then telling them that the world's going to fry is going to make them a bit despondent. And eco-anxiety has become a really big thing, including kids. There's stories of kids getting really depressed because they're just being told, your future is over. It's going to be an apocalypse. That is not helpful. And then there's this also disconnect, because if you're sort of saying the world's going to fry unless you switch off the lights properly, turn down your thermostat, try and walk to work a bit more, people will detect the sort of disconnect between the tales of apocalypse and these minor things that you might want to get them to do. So you have to be very careful with that. So a very positive, upbeat message all the time and a can-do attitude, if we all work together, we will make this happen, will get you much further down the line. And that costs you nothing. It's all down to yourself. So that's idea number one. Idea number two is related and actually creates a bit of a theme through many of these other concepts, because what I don't think many people understand is sustainability is about change. We know that, but change is all about psychology. So idea number two is actually read a psychology book. And if you're going to read one, I would recommend Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, because I think it's brilliant. If you've read it, you'll probably say, yes, it's good. You may have started it and stopped. It took me 2 goes to get through it, partly because it is a Nobel Prize winner, downloading everything into your head all at once, and that's a bit overwhelming. So I found the way to do it was almost skim read it, and then pick out things which resonate with you and try and use those and maybe come back to it, rather than trying to understand it all in one reading from start to finish. But the Thinking Fast and Slow bit is about the difference between the analytical thinking that we like to think that we use to make decisions, and that gut instinct decision, which more often than not is our real decision. Not only that, is we quite often use the analytical work to try and back up that gut instinct fast thinking, what we call confirmation bias. And why this is important is because if we're trying to get off business as usual is people's default position. I get up every morning and I reach for the same box of cereal almost every morning and have some cereal. If somebody says, do you fancy a cooked breakfast? Do you fancy something else? It takes me a minute and I have to think, why would I change from my Weetabix to whatever that cooked breakfast or whatever that alternative is? And often not, I'll stick with Weetabix. And that's all to do with psychology. There's getting up in the morning and having a routine is a very comforting thing and sets me up for the rest of the day, etc., etc. But you do have to understand that that's what I will default to. And you will have to think of clever ways to get me to think differently if you want me to have another breakfast. So I can't emphasize this more. If you're serious about sustainability, if you're serious about change, then you've got to start thinking about psychology, because change always comes down to psychology. I'm laboring the point quite a lot here, but one of my little quips is that the biggest barrier to sustainability is 6 inches wide. It's the space between our ears. And I think that's absolutely true. This will be a theme through much of what we're talking about for the rest of this hour. And here's a quick one, one of my favorite things I do is how to sell sustainability to absolutely anybody. But there's a slight trick question because I don't sell sustainability to them. Every workshop I do, and we'll come on to me doing workshops, every workshop I do, I have the same start. I will stand up with a blank sheet of paper on the flip chart, and I will say, why should you take sustainability seriously? And then I will shut up and I will wait for somebody to say something. Now, 10 years ago, people would have said cut costs or comply with regulation. Now they're quite often likely to say our employees want it, our customers want it. But whatever's first, I will wait for that. Then I will write it on the flip chart. And then I'll say anything else until I have the 7 or 8 standard things. And sometimes people throw extra things in, which is interesting. Now, that will take me 10 minutes. I could have put up a PowerPoint slide with those listed on it and read them out to the audience. But, and this is Daniel Kahneman again, if I tell you something, particularly if it involves you changing your behavior, you will psychologically, naturally, we all do it, you will exaggerate the downsides and exaggerate the risks. Sorry, if I just got that wrong. You'll play down the upsides and you will exaggerate the risks. That's the natural thing. Whereas if you have an idea, you will be buzzing and you will exaggerate the benefits and play down the risks. So if you want to sell sustainability to absolutely anybody, you actually get them to sell sustainability to themselves. Ask them why. You have to be careful with the question. Do not say, should we take sustainability seriously? Because then you're opening up the option of them not doing it, and they may take that. You have to ask the right question. Why should we take it seriously? And you will be very surprised at the results. And I mentioned workshops. This is a sort of continuation of this thing about you getting other people to sell themselves things. Benjamin Franklin quote, which I put probably because you always find out that these aren't really the proper personal quote. There's a Confucius quote, which is quite similar, but it's tell me and I forget, teach me and I remember, involve me and I learn. And I have created an entire career about basically involving people in decision making. So if I'm doing a sustainability strategy, instead of me going around with a clipboard, taking notes and going away and writing up a document and then bringing it to people for comment, I run a series of workshops with key decision makers, starting off with the question that we saw in number 3 is why should we take it seriously? Where we together build up a sustainability program. And I'll show you in a minute how we turn that into an action list. The most important thing about that is that those key decision makers literally have skin in the game. It is their strategy, not mine. And they are far more likely to pick up the ball and run with it. And you can see people changing within a workshop. So as I say, this is a quite an early workshop I did with waste managers of Durham, the Durham district councils, which are now abolished. They're developing ideas for their external engagement, but I do it with sustainability strategy. I do it with all sorts of things. And it's important because those people get to feed in to the process. And then it's their idea, as I say. And you'll see the psychological playing field, instead of playing uphill, you'll start to see it's a run downhill. And it works, trust me. So number 4 is involve people. Number 5 is find allies. And the Machiavellian bit, I'm not too squeamish about these things, is get them to speak up early on. Because, have you ever been to a workshop or round table or some, interactive event, and the facilitator will say, okay, this is the topic, and they'll turn to the person on the left and say, what do you think, Bob? And then they go around the table. And you will notice almost every time, at least 50%, sometimes more, of people will start their sentence with, I agree with Bob. So Bob has this massive influence on the rest of the conversation because he's spoken first. So what I've found is if you're going to have any sort of open debate where things could go different directions, it is really worthwhile making sure that whoever speaks first is somebody that you can trust to be positive about what you're discussing. Because if the person who speaks first trashes the whole thing, then you are on a loser from the start. This, by the way, this is, I never, when I'm running workshops, go around the table like that. If it's in person, I get people to write their ideas down and post it first so that they're not influenced by Bob. Poor Bob here is getting quite a hard deal. You get people to write down their ideas and post it first, and then you can go around and get contributions, and they've already had their thoughts before their, Bob's had a chance. But if you have any sort of consultation, whether it's online or anything, try and make sure that the people you can trust to help you are speaking first. One of my old clients, he had a non-executive director on the board who he knew was very keen on sustainability, and he always fed him with information for boardroom meetings to make sure that the right thing was being said early on in the conversation in the boardroom when he wasn't there. So find allies. Number 6, use green jiu-jitsu. This is one of my, this is green jiu-jitsu, it's the name of one of my books, of course, but it's my overarching concept for employee engagement. And that sort of doomism that we was talking about before is, I always think it's a wee bit like boxing. You're trying to beat the other person in submission by telling them that they must do this and they must do that for this reason, that reason. Here's the data, and you're throwing things at them all the time and hoping that this will overwhelm them and they'll change their mind. A jiu-jitsu expert thinks about combat in a slightly different way, and they will adjust their techniques to work to the strengths of their opponent. So if you go at a jiu-jitsu expert fast, they will use a technique that will use your speed and momentum against you. If you're tall, they will use a different technique that works for tall people. If you're short, they'll use a different technique that works for short people. They work to your strengths, and they adjust their technique depending on you, rather than just trying to beat you into submission. It's all a bit, I know it's all a bit combative, but I quite like the analogy, despite not being a martial artist. What does this mean in practice? Well, and I do like a good Venn diagram. What you really want to do is find the sweet spot between the interests of your audience and sustainability. Because most engagement just thinks we've got to talk sustainability and doesn't think about the audience. The reason why this is important is because we are bombarded with loads of information every second of the day. There's all sorts of information feeding into our heads. We filter most of it out and focus on what's important to us. If you're outside that blue circle, whatever you're saying will be filtered out. So what you have to do is find that overlap, that sweet spot, as I call it, because then you're getting sustainability through the filter. And I first discovered this working with a major engineering company, and I was asked to go in and talk to them about switching their TV off properly and recycling more at home. And I said, I was terrified of this idea. I'm an engineer. Why would I want to go and tell engineers how to switch a TV off properly? Whether or not they are switching their TV off properly, they're going to think this is really patronizing. So instead, and I show this on the later webinars, I created a workshop where we developed solutions for the company's sustainability problems. And because engineers get up out of bed in the morning to solve problems, they love this and they got really stuck in. And we got a load of sustainability ideas out of it to boot, which have been very influential on me, some really good ones as well. I work a lot with the NHS, various parts of the NHS and other health-related companies, and we always emphasize the health benefits of sustainability and the health benefits of, say, cycling to work and things like that. We always play on that health overlap, because again, if you've got people who get out of bed in the morning to look after people and look after their health, they will be far more receptive to a health stroke sustainability message than a pure, save the polar bears or something like that. And they'll say, well, no, I've got heart surgery to do in a couple of seconds. Why are you talking to me about the polar bears? So it really does work. You find that sweet spot. Top tip here that I haven't put down, if you want, easiest way to find the sweet spot is to ask people. If you've got sustainability and champions and things like that, ask them what turns on people in your organization, what turns them off, and you will get a profile that you can build your engagement around. Still on psychology, experience is incredibly powerful. This picture I took in the far north of Russia, and this is my road to Damascus. It's a place called Monchegorsk, which ironically means beautiful place in the local Sami language. But all those chimneys that you might be able to make out in the background belong to a nickel smelter. And that cloud is not a natural cloud, as you can see from the gunk feeding the bottom of it. It is basically a cloud of acid rain. And you can see a couple of little bits of scrubby scrub around the edges of this lake, but this should be forest, and it's all gone. And what's left, the tree stumps, are bleached white by the acid rain. And I could taste the acid on my tongue. And up until this point, I had been an armchair environmentalist. After this point, I came back from Russia and I made this my career. A little bit of extra resonance in here, as I said, I'm an engineer, is I could literally see the engineering at the background causing the problem. Whereas when I was studying engineering, if you wanted to study anything to do with the environment, you had to do ecology, basically. Environmental engineering meant sewage treatment and things like that. There's lots of courses now which do the overlap, but it made that link to me that the problem wasn't the destroyed plants by acid rain, it was those chimneys that were the real problem, and that was engineering. So as I say, this, I read books. I'd previously, 5 years previously, been very involved in a sort of armchair strokes semi-campaigning sense. After this, I came home and I acted, and that's the difference between thinking about something, thinking you should do something, and actually making major changes to your lifestyle in order to do it. Now, obviously, you can't drag everybody up to the far north of Russia. So, but there are lots of opportunities for experience. A factory near me, where I'm sat at the minute, had it was a Nestle factory. I should give them credit. They wanted to encourage employees to swap to electric cars. So they not only provided a sort of employer incentives to do it, but they actually got hold of a couple of electric cars and lent them to employees who were interested so they could try them, sort of try before you buy. Because again, all that fear of the unknown, as you experience things, drops down. You think, oh, this is all right, drives a bit differently. Oh, the acceleration's a bit pokey. But yeah, you can, that level of experience. Likewise, one of the workshops that I was doing in that engineering company, I remember somebody saying that, they had been on a duty of care inspection of their waste contractor, and just the sheer amount of stuff they saw wasted completely changed their mind, realized, no, we can't go on like this. And again, it was an experience. When you can see things with your own eyes, when you can smell it, when you can taste it, it makes a real difference. So try and think of ways that you can bring experience into what you're trying to do in sustainability. There's psychology through all of this, but moving a little bit away from the pure psychology change management thing, is one of the things I worry about is a new form of greenwash. you all know what greenwash is here probably, but trying to appear greener than you really are. And what happens is people will list like a dozen, 2 dozen bullet points of what they've done. But the question is, does it add up to a lot? Because lots of tiny improvements may just add up to a small improvement overall, but they give the impression that a lot's being done because it's lots of individual things. And this goes back, I mentioned the 80-20 rule, and I'm not going into it here, but the 80-20 rule basically, I'm going to go into it here, it looks like. The 80-20 rule basically says that 20% of what you do delivers 80% of results in many cases, as a rule of thumb. It can be more extreme than that. So all of those actions, all of those bullet points could be the other 80% of things you can do that only deliver 20% of the results. So really you need to be focusing on the things that will make big changes. So we've got to move away from incremental thinking to big leaps, huge jumps, clearing huge boundaries. And the one thing I would really ask you not to do is don't set incremental targets. Do not say, we will reduce our carbon footprint 2% year on year, because you think you might get the blue line there, but you won't. You'll hit diminishing returns and you'll get the red line. And that's because there's only so many 2% you can squeeze out of the system before you come up against the limits of the system. But because you're spending all your time chasing those 2%, there's no incentive to change the system. So we're going back to psychology here a bit, because if you set stretch targets, if you say, for example, in this case, it might be, we're going to cut our carbon footprint in half in 5 years and cut it by a further factor of 3 in whatever it might be, 10, 12 years, looking at this rather crude scale, then you focus people's minds on big changes rather than those small changes. You also give time to implement big changes, because if you're going to do an incremental if you're going to do a big capital project, sorry, is the word I was stretching for and failing, then it takes time to plan and implement and all the rest, or investment in a new fleet. All of this takes time. It cannot be done at the drop of a hat. So it gives you time to hit those targets, and it gives you the scale of the target. So it changes your mindset. As I say, psychology underwrites everything in sustainability. It all comes down to psychology, in my book. And if you're wondering why you've done something which logically should work and doesn't, it's probably psychology. Has anybody got any? No, I haven't had any comments through at this point. As I say, if you're wondering, what about X, Y, or Z, stick it in the comments. I will come to it either at the end of one of these or at the very end, depending on how it goes with the flow, to be honest. Right, create the future you want. This sounds and looks like an Athena poster for those of us who are old enough to remember Athena posters. But being an engineer, I always bring a rather pragmatic idea to it. And this is I'm going to talk in a minute about the technique which I use to do sustainability strategies. Now, most people look forward. Now, this graph's quite random, but just imagine you've got arbitrary environmental impact scale vertically, and your green target of however you define sustainability is down at the bottom. So business as usual is taking you on one trajectory, and you start to think of, can you think of enough policies, enough of these small changes, which will bend the trend round to hit that green area? And generally you won't, because you're looking at it from the wrong angle. Backcasting has been about for a very long time, but I don't find that many people use it, which really frustrates me because it is incredibly powerful. So instead of, I'm going to take a risk and see if I can draw on this. Is it going to let me draw? Nope. Oops. I shouldn't have taken that risk. Let's go back to the mouse. Will that take me? Why can't I go back up? So apologies, I shouldn't have taken that risk. Should have practiced that if I was going to do it. Come on, let me go back up to the slide I was on. There we go. Sorry, it seemed to get itself in. I was going to try and draw on it. You'll just have to put up with me waving my hands. In backcasting, you forget about business as usual, and you work from the end point that you want to achieve. So you define what your organization would look like if you met your sustainability targets. And I usually get people to draw this out because this is the easiest stage in it. But you say, right, if we hit net zero by 2030, 2040, 2050, whatever it might be, what would the organization look like? And then I generally go back one intermediate stage. You can do it more often, but I find one works really well. So if it's a 10-year strategy, we'll go back 5 years and say, okay, in 5 years' time, what would we have to have started doing and what would we have to have stopped doing in order to be on the right trajectory to hit that endpoint? And then you do it back for what do we need to start doing now and what do we need to stop doing now to get into that trajectory for the intermediate stage. And this has all sorts of benefits over traditional forecasting approach. It you are starting with that goal, so you're much more likely to hit it. Rather than sort of vaguely aiming in the right direction, which is what most so-called sustainability strategies do. They just list things that other people do that might benefit. But this is actually trying to push you towards the proper goal you're trying to achieve. The second, by doing that, you get away from what we call the tyranny of the present, which is all the short-term influences that you think you might be able to do X, Y, or Z because, I don't know, you can't get hold of solar panels, whatever it might be, that really short-term stuff that that stymies an awful lot of work. And it is also really suitable for group working. So I talked about, I developed strategies with key decision makers. So this is perfect going through this process with key decision makers. And lastly, the people who do it find it a lot of fun, an awful lot of fun. So, and that again builds a sense of ownership. And I did it with the board of one organization. And I remember, well, it's happened with two, but one that always, the first one where this happened, where I was trying to get them to sign up to a target of about 40% carbon reduction in 10 years, I think it was. And after doing this, the boss suggested they take it up to 50. Likewise, I had another client, as I say, I said I've done it twice, I've done it with lots of clients, but I had another client where the same thing happened, where by going through the process, they decided they were going to be more ambitious rather than less. And that very rarely happens if you've ever taken a document to a board and tried to get them to approve it. They tend to water it down. So it is a very powerful technique. Simon's asked a question, presumably that helps with budgeting for change as it gives the deadline to which investment capex must be allocated. Yes, both this works with stretch targets. I don't know whether the comment was about stretch targets or this bit, but the two are interrelated. So yes, you can get an idea that if the intermediate stage is have permission to build a new plant or move to a new office building, whatever it might be, you can then start to attach costs at the different stages. So absolutely. Right. So that's how I develop sustainability strategies. This is my favorite supply chain one, so it tends to stay in from year to year. I know some of you have been before, you'll have seen this before. Challenge your suppliers. I did some work a few years ago with Interface, and if you don't know about Interface and their sustainability program Mission Zero, then you should. Unfortunately, the poor guy is dead, but Confessions of an Unconventional Industrialist, which is on the shelves behind me, by the founder of Interface, Ray Anderson, it's a bit hokey, but it's absolutely brilliant and inspiring. And for a carpet tile manufacturer, and the biggest carpet tile manufacturer in the world, they do all sorts of wonderful things, and they do things very differently from everybody else. That's what I really take away from them. And we all talk about ocean plastics, and at least a third of ocean plastics are discarded fishing nets. And what Interface do is they take, or one of their suppliers takes discarded fishing nets off beaches and reprocesses them into nylon carpets. And this is, quite a breakthrough thing. If you've ever been to PwC's headquarters in London, you're walking on old fishing nets as you walk into the reception. They have it there. They sell it as a premium product. Actually, as an aside, because I don't have a circular economy slide in this year, they are looking for the bulk of their raw materials to come from old carpets. But how they did this was they say that instead of trying to police their supply chain and do all the audits and all that stuff, they challenge their suppliers to solve their Interface's environmental problems. So instead of Interface trying to fix theirs, they say to their suppliers, you fix our sustainability problems for you. And it's again, one of those psychological things where you've got to get people to think the other way around. Because why would you be paying somebody to keep causing you an environmental problem or potential reputational problem? You should be challenging your suppliers to solve those problems for you instead. After all, you're paying them. So, little quick one there. Number 11, unsustainability is poor design. I love this example. Lucozade were held up by the Recycling UK as one of the worst packaging because they take a perfectly recyclable bottle and they wrap it in a incompatible plastic wrap, which is difficult for the consumer to remove, and it contaminates the plastic. Very few other bottles that you buy have this design. Some of them do, if you look at the shelves next time. But it is a design problem. And GlaxoSmithKline, who produced Lucozade, bizarrely said that they would work with anybody who could come up with a technological solution. And the real technological solution is design the problem out of your bottle. So absolutely, and this is one of my favorite quotes: take the filters out of the pipes and put them where they belong, in the designers' heads. You can solve an awful lot of problems from designing them out at the start. Right. CS Tan, some organizations use business risk management method to address sustainability in suppliers. What is your take? Well, I think you have to do that because your suppliers are always a business risk. But this is going beyond that and saying to your suppliers, if you want to work with us, you have to be coming up with revolutionary sustainable solutions. You have to be challenging them and challenging them properly, not just tick a box, have you got an environmental policy? You have to be saying, what are you going to do to reduce our carbon footprint? And I'm working on a project with the NHS at the minute, and they have a new policy that they're not going to accept any supplier that doesn't have a net zero target I think 2040 is, I can't remember the exact date, but there is a cutoff date that if you don't have a net zero target in your organization, you're not going to get a contract from the NHS, which is the third or the fifth biggest organization in the world, depending on how you count it. So it's a big thing. So yes, business risk management, that's the flip side, the sort of mitigating any potential negative sides. But the kick-ass idea I'm trying to get across here is very much challenge them to solve your problems. And you'll find those risks go down. And we go into that quite a lot in the supply chain module on Green Academy. And the 12th one, wield the axe. Sorry, just a quick time check there. And this, I think, is the litmus test between the people who take sustainability seriously and those who don't. So interface I mentioned before, Mission Zero. Mission Zero is there. It's past now. I haven't caught up with any of my contacts at Interface to see how it finally finish up, because it was their idea to have a zero footprint by 2020. And they have deleted products which were profitable, but they were never going to get them to Mission Zero. So in particular, some flame retardants in the carpet. They didn't want to perpetuate that problem, so they killed them off. And this, and they show it, they don't show any reluctance to this. They take relish to destroying things within their organization that aren't sustainable. And if you think about the move to a sustainable economy, we don't only have to do all the nice green growth stuff that everybody likes to brag about, we have to destroy the brown economy. Because a green economy on top of a brown economy will still be unsustainable. The unsustainable bit has to die, for want of a better word. So it's this idea of creative destruction. And you will see the best organizations will quite happily stop doing stuff. This is, I mentioned GlaxoSmithKline and the Lucozade bottles. Interface just would say, right, let's design that from scratch to be sustainable. We're killing off that whole idea because it doesn't work. And it's that relish of doing it. And in many ways, if we do move towards a green economy, if you hang on to bits of the brown economy, they're going to die anyway, but that might be at your financial detriment, because you haven't created the green stuff to replace it. Hope that makes sense. Right, so there are our 12, oh crikey, 13 ideas. There's something crept in there. Oops, just try to change that. I've left in the circular economy. I do apologize for that. I've put 13 ideas in there, but I did talk about the circular economy very briefly. So a can-do attitude, read a psychology book, get people to sell sustainability to themselves, involve people, and I do this by running workshops to co-create whatever you're trying to do, whether that's on a small little team level or getting the boardroom in to do a workshop to redesign the whole company. Get your allies in place and persuade them to speak up first. Use green jiu-jitsu, in other words, look at what the interests of your audience are and tailor your message to those interests. The power of experience will make people change how they act. Avoid incrementalism, use stretch targets instead. Use backcasting to create the future you want. Challenge your suppliers instead of trying to police them. Well, you need to police them as well. And unsustainability is poor design. If you want to know what the key to the circular economy is, it's actually about using sustainable, thinking of it in terms of sustainable raw materials rather than as a waste strategy. That's where people go wrong in the circular economy. The circular economy, if you want it to work, is all about dragging sustainable raw materials through the loop, which will create the recycling. But if you see it as a waste management technique, you will flounder. And then lastly, wield the axe. Okay, so I hope you have got on your workbook some high, medium, lows as we've gone through there, and some ideas of those that you can take away as a bit of assessment. This is a kind of crude but useful assessment we do. If you look at the numbers that of the ideas that you have rated high, medium, low for opportunity and risk, if you enter the numbers into this grid, just be careful because for layout reasons, the risk cost, the downside goes from high down to low. If you put the numbers in the right box, how you've ranked them, then your best options should float to the top right, and the worst options, which have highest risk and lowest opportunity, should navigate down to the bottom left. And that then gives you a little bit of an assessment on which of those you should be thinking about taking forward. So I'm going to take a drink of water and give you a couple of minutes to do that. Just realized why my attempt to annotate the document didn't work. I didn't use the part. I was using the Zoom annotate tools, not the PowerPoint ones, which is why I've still got a red dot in the middle of my screen. You've probably got it as well. Right, that'll teach me to practice that before I start trying to use it. Okay, so if you've done that, then the last exercise, which is a little bit of backcasting, like a simplified backcasting, is I want you to list the 3 most important things you've learned today from this session. 1, 2, 3. For each of them, I want you to look forward 6 months to a year and say, what would you be doing differently, or what would you have achieved as a result if you embrace those 3 things? So sort of 6 months to a year. And then for each of them, which action will you take first? Or do you need to take first? When I say first, I mean this afternoon, Thursday, Friday, end of next week at the latest. And those could be very simple actions like ask so-and-so for a meeting, by thinking fast and slow, whatever, look up something on eco design so we can bring a design into the organization. It has to be a really simple task. And it's a sort of like simplifies backcasting because we're looking at the big vision of what we're trying to achieve, what that would feel like if you'd achieved it, and then what you have to do, that very first step to get there. Now, we do this exercise, the exact same exercise at the end of every Green Academy session, because again, we've all been to training courses, been on webinars, all the rest of it, where we learn interesting stuff and then it goes into the someday maybe drawer. The whole point of this is to prioritize the stuff that you really want to do something with, and then work out what that very first step is, because often when you take that first step, it locks you into the trajectory and you're far more likely to achieve it. Because at the end of the day, Green Academy is not about me talking and you listening. It's about you taking stuff away and making real change happen within your organization. So that was 12. Where's the half? Now I call it a half because it is this is the plug, because As I said, continual professional development is one of the 3 things we do. There's 3 levels we work at on CPD. Green Academy is the cheapest, most accessible that we do. Then we have a thing called the Corporate Sustainability Mastermind Group, which is a small group of sustainability professionals in large organizations. The picture there shows one of the meeting rooms. We used to meet in person. Since COVID started, we've been meeting virtually, so we can extend it across the world. Anybody can take part. And it's a peer-to-peer learning situation. So there's no PowerPoint as one of the rules, no experts. We work under the Chatham House rules, so you can exchange information, ideas very openly, but people can use it, but they can't say who said something or even who was in the room when it was said. So you're protected, so that you can be very honest, and you would be very surprised. You get people saying things like, we're not going to hit this target, but I don't want to dilute it, because as soon as I dilute it, it's game over, and insights like that. And it's very powerful. Let me know if you're interested. And then the most intense continual professional development we do is one-to-one coaching, where I support you doing what you're trying to do. So it is important. We should all be trying to learn. We should all be trying to expand our horizons and all the rest of it. But as I say, it is a bit cheeky because none of these are free. So that's why it's the half one in there. There's the Green Academy syllabus for 2022. It's the session names haven't changed over the years, but the content has changed a lot. It's constantly being updated, new case studies, new ideas, new concepts all fed in there. And we try and cover everything that you need to be sustainable. We don't do boring stuff. Is that fair to say? So we don't do ISO 14001. We don't do anything with ISO in it, with requiring lots of documentation. It's all about practical changes that you can make, all the high level stuff, and then you can implement the other things, KPIs and all the rest. But to support that, we do the big picture stuff. They all run 2 to 3 London time, usually on the first Wednesday of a month. So the first one's on the 2nd of February. They sometimes, because of holidays, I'm very UK oriented, we skip the UK school holidays because I'll be doing other things, and lots of people will be doing other things. So if they're not on the couple there in the middle that are on the end of April, the end of May, or because of holidays and holiday weeks, bank holidays and whatnot. And if you want to sign up before the end of January to all 10 sessions, so 10 hours of training, we'll give you a discount, and it's just £264 plus VAT, which is far too cheap. I haven't put prices up for years. It's a little bit of a lost leader, I think, and I enjoy doing it. I should really put the price up someday, but that's the call to action in a webinar if I was going to follow any marketing gurus. But whether you join us in Green Academy for the year or not, I really do hope that you've got plenty out of today's session, and I will hang on here for a bit. If you've got any further questions, whether it's about the content today, whether it's about Green Academy, whether it's about anything else, I'm more than happy to pick those up. But I will stop the recording now. You'll get a copy of the recording so you can catch up on anything that you feel you've missed, as I've been talking at 200 miles an hour in order to fit this all into an hour. But I do hope that you've taken plenty from it, and that those actions really do make difference to your organization. So until next time, goodbye.